As moms, we should make time for reading stories. Now, of course, that includes reading stories with our kids, but it also means reading classic novels for ourselves because we will be shocked at how applicable the lessons about motherhood and homemaking are, even in the books that don't have motherhood or homemaking as a primary theme. We learn far more from such classic novels than we do from sappy feel-good stories. Let me explain how that works. Hi, I'm Mystie Winckler, and this is Simply Convivial, the podcast that equips you to cheerfully and competently manage your home. Convivial means doing life together with joy, and that's what we want our homes to be all about. So, grab a basket of laundry to fold, and let's dig in. Yes, moms should read novels. Story grip might be a strong temptation, but it's worth the struggle. I've written before about how novels changed my homemaking by waking me up to some of my own bad attitudes about housework back when my third child was an infant. The funny thing about this experience was that I didn't go into reading the novels thinking that I would get insights that directly applied to my current life. I was reading the novels to rest, to pass a quiet evening, to occupy my mind while painting the kitchen, to have something in hand while nursing. I was also reading books to solve my current plights at the time, of course, but for solutions, I turned to nonfiction. I read productivity books, homemaking books, Christian living books, and they were helpful. And many things that I learned from those books still influence me today. But the unexpected gut punch of the novels really helped wake me up to myself. So recently, when a reader emailed and asked me for suggestions of classic novels that she could read that had good examples of mothers seeking to serve their families, I thought she was asking a good question. Here was her question. Thank you so much for all of your work for homeschooling Christian homemakers. I am really enjoying your new book because I struggle with perfectionism. I was just wondering if you happen to have any suggested classic novels with good examples of mothers seeking to serve their families. Stories can change our mind and our affections more dramatically and effectively than nonfiction. So it's a worthwhile question. However, first we have to be careful about examining what we really want from a novel. When I was a kid, there was a popular series for girls in the homeschool world, the Elsie Dinsmore books. This series was recommended as sweet, safe, and Christian, promoting proper priorities for young girls. Question is, do we want our girls or ourselves to be goody two-shoes? Do we want our children to be so good that their personal standards are elevated above their parents' standards, such that they turn and judge their parents? Elsie Dinsmore is the perfect example of a novel that actually undermines exactly what it sets out to teach. The main character is so pristine and so good that it's actually a false story that in no way helps our daughters handle real life or real people. If our daughters identify with Elsie, they're actually thinking too highly of themselves. If they don't identify with Elsie, they're likely to conclude that a Christian way of life just isn't for them. But the version of a Christian life that Elsie leads is one of false guilt and overwrought repentance over the false guilt. Now, we don't want to overreact into grunge Christianity that says to be real, we need to wallow in messy sinfulness of unrepentance. Instead, we want to recognize the value of old school, traditional fairy tales, the ones that make sweet moms skittish and squeamish. Fairy tales like those that Lang collected in his many colored fairy books. They teach us in principle that bad things are bound to happen, but we have choices about what we do with unfortunate circumstances. The fairy tales teach us that no matter how bad a situation is, a hero can always make it worse. And a true hero in a bad situation shines all the brighter because he still chooses rightly despite pressure to the contrary. Choices can always be made, and choices always come with consequences. We can be satisfied with our good choices even when we don't see instant reward. Classic fairy tales that haven't been savaged for modern sensibilities prepare us and our children for real life better than any sappy feel-good story, no matter how prim, proper, and pretty the heroine. So when we're on the lookout for novels, for stories about people and the human condition, to help us learn to love what must be done as moms and homemakers, we actually don't want stories that have idealized mother figures or that moralistically present what we all ought to be doing. We won't learn how to be good mothers by such stories because it turns out that we are not ideal mothers. Usually, such characters in a novel, such idealized characters, are props and foils for a main character. They aren't usually developed characters in their own right. It's better to read a story with a noble and benevolent queen and then translate her traits into our own lives than look for a story with a perfect homemaker character and attempt to imitate her. For example, we learn what manly nobility and courage and leadership is like from Aragorn in the Lord of the Rings series. But we are all hobbits who merely esteem nobility and courage through him, and we aren't to do what he does. So what do we learn about queenly femininity from Galadriel? Hint: the movies can't teach properly because the writer and the producers and the directors had no concept of manly nobility or queenly femininity. You have to go to the books for this. What do we learn of patience and feminine stalwartness from Arwen? Perhaps the best lessons for us modern women is to watch the slow blossoming, rebellion, and healing of Éowyn. Again, you won't see this in the movies, only in the books, because her true story is quite anti-feminist and unpalatable to modern movie audiences. So the movies totally messed this up. After the world is put back to rights from the war, Éowyn repents of her foolhardy crush and for abandoning her post for a seemingly better glory. She says, "I shall be a healer and love all things that grow and are not barren." But we think if she hadn't rushed off to the battle with the men, the Witch King would never have been conquered. So she proved that she was as valuable a warrior as any man. Without her, the battle would have been lost. So it seems like her rebellion produced good. Ah, I say, you saw the movies, did you? Yes, Éowyn was brave and bold. Yes, Éowyn was stifled in an unhealthy home, and unquestionably, yes, Aragorn was right to tell her to stay. God draws straight with crooked lines. It wasn't Éowyn's strength or her rebellion that saved the day. It was the fact that God used her where she was, according to her frustrated, misdirected, heartfelt desire to do something. And he used her to put to shame the proud, because there's nothing worse to a wicked, all-powerful enemy than to be defeated by a woman. And after being so used, she takes no credit. She repents of her foolishness, and she is made whole. The good, whole version of Éowyn is a healer, not a conqueror. We learn much more about femininity, homeliness from such stories than from pristine, feel-good romances. So 2 novels that really affected my thinking about housework had nothing really to do about housework in particular. They were Dickens' Bleak House and Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. The heroine in Bleak House has virtue, exemplified in her homemaking. Now, she's not a mother, but her character made me realize that keeping house was not just tedious extra work, but it's actually evidence that can be used to tell people about your actual character. Bleak House reminds us to be patient and persistent and hopeful in the midst of trials, literal and metaphorical. Here is a quote from Bleak House. There were 2 classes of charitable people. One, the people who did a little and made a great deal of noise. The other, the people who did a great deal and made no noise at all. Mansfield Park has no ideal mother character, but the heroine does bounce between 2 very different homes. Though neither home is perfect, how they are kept is indicative of the familial health. Austen, in all of her novels, always provides commentary on various female types and temptations. An attentive reader will necessarily be provoked and convicted by Jane Austen's dry analysis. Here is a quote. Henry Crawford had too much sense not to feel the worth of good principles in a wife, although he was too little accustomed to serious reflection to know them by their proper name. In the classic novel Anna Karenina, Anna is not a role model, certainly, but sometimes we see how we should think and act by experiencing a contrast. The novel also does portray characters as Anna's foil that teach us by counterexample. One theme of the novel is familial and domestic harmony, and we see how women make or break that harmony. Moms reading novels like Anna Karenina can help us understand temptations we or our friends might face, and at least we will know what not to do. Here is a quote, the famous first line of Anna Karenina. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Wendell Berry's novel, Hannah Coulter, also has a very formative perspective on life from a feminine angle. As Hannah reflects on her life and her children in her old age, we learn to think about our own lives from the future's point of view as well. Plus, we see how the way we see ourselves might not be correct. Even though life might not turn out the way we expected or the way that we were working for as young women, there will always be a way to move forward in faithfulness and joy. Here's a quote. As she nursed and the milk came, she began a little low, contented sort of singing. I would feel milk and love flowing from me to her as once it had flowed to me. It emptied me. As the baby fed, I seemed slowly to grow empty of myself, as if in the presence of that long flow of love, even grief could not stand. Next up is Kristen Lavra's My first caveat to this sublime novel is that no woman should read it while pregnant or postpartum. I read it just as I was becoming a mother of teen boys, and it felt like a gut punch. Kristen makes many, many mistakes. She both builds up her house with energy and commitment, and she also tears it down with her own hands. And sometimes she's doing both at the same time. It's a story of the suffering, joy, and struggle of marriage and motherhood, and how women make or break their husbands and sons. Here's a quote. "But I didn't realize then that the consequence of sin is that you have to trample on other people." I would love for you to share in the comments on the YouTube video or blog post, which is also linked in the show notes, your favorite novels and the difference that they made to you and the lessons you learned, maybe obliquely, from different novels that you've read. Do you not have time to read? Is that your excuse? Well, then you need my time budget template and helps to help you see where you have pockets of time that you can use to read. It really is a valuable use of your time, and it's worth budgeting it in to your week. Another helpful hint that I will say is that audiobooks definitely count as reading. Most of the books that I mentioned in this episode are books that I listened to. Listening to a novel while making dinner or cleaning the house is a great way to do two things at once. So in the show notes or description for this episode, you can also find a link to start a free Audible trial and get a book for free. I recommend something like Anna Karenina, Mansfield Park, Bleak House, or Kristen Lavra's for your free credit, because I count my value by how many hours I get for free. So you can find all those links in the description of this episode. And you can also find a link to this episode in blog post format. And you can find links to these books as well. So make time to read and find some good books to fill that time with. It will help you to repent, rejoice, repeat.